Welcome to Survey Booker Sessions. Tune in to hear from people working in a range of industries and roles to provide you ideas that you can take away and use in your own business. I'm your host Matt Nally, the founder and director of Survey Booker, which is the leading CRM and survey management system for surveyors. On this week's episode, we have Hilary Grayson, who is the Director of Surveying Services at Sava. So thank you very much for coming on.
My absolute pleasure, Matt. It's been a little while since I've done a podcast like this, so looking forward to it very much.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Do you want to give everyone, I'm sure a lot of people already know who you are, but do you want to give us a bit of background as to what you do at Sava and what Sava do?
So I'll start with me. So I was a good old-fashioned jobbing surveyor for a long time. I qualified back in the day when there were the old divisions, and I was a general practice surveyor. That meant in truth that I was a valuer first and foremost. And I never really worked in housing other than when I was at Bromley Council. I used to package up land which we would sell mostly for housing developers because of the way that sort of Bromley worked and the way it was sort of structured as a sort of a borough at the time in sort of South London fringes. Following that, I actually went to RICS, and I'm a bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper. So having been on the inside of Great George Street, saw how that worked, which was very interesting. And from Great George Street, and in fact, then my portfolio did include residential. So that's why I picked up the sort of residential portfolio. So I've been working with residential surveyors now for over 20 years, nearer 25, I would say.
Awesome.
And then I joined Sava when Sava was still its first incarnation, which was to do with competency, surveyor competency. It was an independent business. It was set up by my two then colleagues down in Woking. And it was that business that was acquired by my current employer. So I was bought literally 20 years ago this year. It's my anniversary, my emerald anniversary, it turns out, when I was bought by this Sava, as it were. And I led on the development back in the early 2000s on the development of the home inspector qualification that we delivered here. The less said about that, the better. But that gave me the real insight and understanding of vocational qualifications. And that led me on to create, with a chap who's now retired, a chap called Chris Rispin, but we created the Diploma in Residential Surveying and Valuation about 10 years ago now, and we've been running it operationally for about 8. So a lot of people will probably know us through the diploma and sort of recognise us as sort of one of the leading training providers for surveying in the country. Our business, interestingly, we do also offer. We have a software side where we profile the energy efficiency of housing stock. So we have over 200 housing provider clients on that side of the business who use our profiling software as part of their drive for net zero. And that's a side of the business that we're exploring in terms of a skills and educational need as well. So that's me, and a bit of an introduction to Sava as well.
Awesome. I think that's a nice segue actually into, I suppose, what we're going to be covering today. So we'll touch on the net zero sustainability bits later on in the episode.
Yeah.
But I suppose the first bit, tying into the training aspect and the diploma side. My first question, and I suppose this is possibly more useful for students that are looking to come into the industry, is what do you need to consider as a student or potential student coming into the surveying industry?
I think for what we say to our learners, and it's definitely sort of bears out in the success of people going through the program, is you have to be interested in property. You don't have to have had a background in property. You don't have to be you don't have to be an estate agent. About a third of our learners will come from a state agency, 25%, 30% will come from a state agency. You don't have to be a small landlord. You don't have to have a background. But what you do have to have is a real interest in the subject. Because if you don't, there's a lot to absorb, there's a lot to take in. And if you don't have that kind of interest and drive, it will be a chore rather than a pleasure to do the learning. So I would say that's the most critical kind of thing about an individual, that have that real interest and passion about property.
On that note, then, are there things you can do to really test how much you think you are interested in? Because I say this from the perspective of I did a uni course years ago, and I chose the wrong course to begin with, and had to swap and do something else, move on to a different course. And it's something I thought I was really interested in. It covered the 4 subjects I did at school.
Made exactly the same mistake. Or I can relate to
Yeah.
that. I can relate to that. Do you know what? It's kind of, it's walking down a street. I think if you're walking down a street and you're looking around you and
Mm,
you are looking at you're looking at houses, you're looking at buildings, and you're thinking, how old is that? And why was that built there? And I wonder who lives there, and what's the history of that, and why has that property got that particular feature?
mm,
And if there's a brick wall that looks a bit odd, can you what might be going on with that brick wall? And do those people share a drive? How do they manage their access? How do they manage who repairs what? Can you even get a car into that garage? It's just noticing things that make you kind of go, what is this all about? And I think that would be, if you walk down, if you look at a house and you think age, you're just not interested. I,
yeah.
I I can't see that it would fly with you. And I think housing in particular, where we live, places we live, I think there's also, and I think this is one of the things that makes me really interested in housing, is it ties in with sort of kind of social history, and how, particularly over the last 150 years, which is sort of a bit of a sort of most of us will live in housing that was built over the last 150 years, and most of the housing stock in the UK will date from those sorts of period. And it's kind of like being able to relate how we've developed as a society and what was
Mm,
happening, and the great all towns are going to have sort of swathes of Victorian terraced housing. Why was there no terraced housing before sort of the late 1800s? What was it that sort of drove people to the towns? What was going on in the world? What was going on after the First World War that drove the move to sort of garden cities, and the sort of changes in architecture that we began to see in the 20s and 30s, and ditto in the 50s? Why was suddenly 1950s looking different to what it had looked like in the 1930s? And it all ties in with sort of a wider sort of kind of social picture. So I think social history is something, again, that it floats my boat, and I think it again comes back to that: how did housing react to our needs,
yeah.
and technological changes, and changes in kitchens and introduction of washing machines and all of that made the way we occupy our houses so different. So yeah, if that
That's
makes
a lovely
sense.
perspective. Yeah, that's a lovely perspective. It makes me think of well, back in school, I didn't particularly enjoy history, sadly, and then now I really find it interesting. And one of my favourite programs is abandoned engineering. So it's looking at those types of projects that came up
Yeah.
and why are they built there. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did enjoy history at school. I did enjoy history up to O level anyway. I did history, and I did enjoy it. But yeah, I do find it fun. But it's always about the people. The buildings are great, and that's what's left. You see the buildings, and you see what's, a remnant of an old castle or whatever it might be. But it's the people. It's what was it that drove somebody to invest time and energy and money and resources into building that thing there, and how did they live, and how did they occupy it, and what were the drivers? And it's really interesting. In my on the side, I'm a trustee at a charity here in Milton Keynes, and it's place called Westbury Arts Centre. And the building itself dates from the 1600s, or bits of it do. Some of it's 1950s, but it's actually on a site that was occupied by the Saxons.
ah,
And I am the custodian of a moat, or what's left of a moat, that is over 1,000 years old. And you think, why were they building moats in Milton Keynes 1,000 years ago? Why were the Saxons building moats, making their farmsteads? Because it was a farmer working sort of farmstead. Why were they building moats? Why were they fortifying it? It's because uh, the Vikings were literally just up the road in Northamptonshire. So this literally, Milton Keynes was Wild West territory. I can imagine the Saxons and the Vikings skirmishing over the Great Ouse, just literally just over from where the office is now. So yeah, it's little things like that. It was they were living, they were working the land. It was sustainable sustenance living, but then they needed to build themselves a blooming great moat in case the Vikings sent down a raiding party.
That's
Bit of
fascinating.
a sideline there, but anyway, yes.
I suppose my other question is around going into the training side. I completely agree with you on the interest and engagement
Yeah,
with it.
yeah.
How do you know? Because there's so many pathways. How do you know if the survey and valuation route is the right one?
That's a tricky one. That
Yeah.
that really is a tricky one, and we do get people who phone us up and ask about construction often. So we get quite a few people asking about quantity surveying because it's related to construction.
Hmm.
Um, I, I I think the thing to do, and I have had lots of conversations with people about this, where people have thought, I like what you do, but I'm not quite sure it's right for me because give us a ring. And we can always talk through what you will actually learn so that you can make a judgment about how you will apply that uh, and how that sort of fits with what your sort of kind of ambition is. A really classic example is people who work more in a kind of more of a rural environment, and they're never clear if they want to be rural surveyors and valuers or whether they want to go down the residential route. And I've had loads of conversations with people along those sorts of lines, and some have joined the course because they've gone, actually that would be a way forward, and some have gone off and inquired about courses at places like Cirencester, etc. So it is a tricky one, but I would always say give us a ring. You can speak to I've with colleagues here who have these conversations, or people can always speak to me. I'll talk to the cows come home about it. So yeah, but it's a really good question. How do you know why would I do this and not off more general real estate stuff? And yeah, I get it. Yeah, give us a ring.
That's fair enough. I
Yeah.
agree with that. And then I suppose the other things. And what are the challenges people might face in the process that they might not think about that they can prepare better for? Like one thing we see come up a lot is, I suppose, the questions around shadowing, for example, and getting that contact time. Are there things people can do to prepare in advance to?
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do if you're thinking about this is find is put feelers out and find a surveyor who in your area who is already working. And one of the things, and this is how I joined the profession donkeys ago, one of the things you could do is ask if you could go out with them before you even commit to the course, because if you're alongside them and they're talking to you about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and if you can relate to that and think this is interesting, then it helps validate your decision. But if you're thinking I couldn't do this every day, then it's not for you. So there's definitely put feelers out. When we started, people didn't know we existed. We were not established, obviously, and we were a bit of an unknown quantity. But now we've got we've been going 8-9 years doing this. We've got graduates everywhere, and we've got firms that have employed graduates. We're so much better known, and it's possible that you could be speaking to a local surveyor and they could be one of our graduates from a few years ago.
Mm.
So I would say that would be a really good way to kind of sort of begin to put feelers out. But the other thing I would say is be realistic about the amount of time it's going to take you. It is a commitment. And so, what you need to do if you're thinking about it is sit down with a partner, with your family, your friends, whatever, and say, I am going to do this. It will mean I will make some sacrifices. So, if don't, please do not be disappointed if I say I'm not coming to the family barbecue, because I need to spend some time doing some work, doing some studying, whatever it may be, and
Yeah.
just getting buy in. from family and friends so that they don't sort of put external pressures on you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because you have to have the support there as well,
Yeah,
in order to be
yeah,
able to get
yeah,
through.
yeah,
How,
absolutely.
how, how long does it take typically? Is it around 2 years? Is that right? Or
It's we promote it as a 2-year course. There's the first 13, 14 months are sort of in a much more structured training environment where you'll be told what to do and given timetable to do it. And then following on from that, there is what the assessment process, which is very much driven by the learner in terms of their own sort of um, timetable.
yeah,
And we have had people finish that last bit quicker than 2 years, but for the most part, I think the average is something like 26, 27 months at the moment from start right through to finish. So yeah, allow 2 years.
awesome. And then
Yeah.
I think that my final question from my side, actually, just touching back on the shadowing part, is, and you may not know the answer to this, but one thing I see come up a fair bit is people asking for shadowing, and then maybe surveyors worrying about the implications, I don't know, around GDPR or, you know, legal things.
Yeah.
Is that an actual concern that they should have, or
So first of all, if people are on the course and want to shadow, then we will provide public liability. So for individual firms, if they say, "Oh, I'm a bit worried, supposing you break the Ming vase," so long as we know, so long as the learner and the firm contact us at, Joe Blogg Surveyors Limited says we are mentoring Jim the learner or Sally the learner or whoever, as long as we just know we've got a record, then you're covered under our public liability, and we have that kind of covered. So and for the most part, actually, that's not an issue because most firms will have a public liability insurance that covers not just not just formal employees, but people working under the auspices of that firm. But we have put that in place for several people. GDPR, we hear that sometimes. Well, we used to hear that from the likes of the corporates around sort of um, sort of information that you might hear about a customer. But in reality, while we heard about it, this is going back like 8 years, it's not been an issue lately. And I think the thing is, the learner isn't interested in Mrs. Miggins, the customer. They're not interested in where they are now. They're not interested in what level of lending they may or may not be exposing themselves to. They're not interested in any of that. They just want to go to the property. And I think actually the way a lot of instructions, even in a corporate world, are given now, a lot of the valuers won't necessarily have any personal information about their customer because that's been filtered through a booking system. They might know the potential, well, they'll know the potential lender. They might know how much a mortgage is, and they might know the name of the customer, but that's it, And if it's Mrs. Smith, it could be any Mrs. Smith. So it 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 hasn't really been an issue for a long time. That hasn't been raised. And it's interesting you asked because I think it's personally, I think it's a non-problem. I can see why people get concerned about it, but I don't think in practical terms it is an issue at all. Because as I say, the learners just want to know about the bricks and mortar of what they're going to look at. So yeah,
that makes sense, and that's what my thoughts would have been on it.
yeah,
It's good to
yeah.
hear that it's something that people can go and do safely, and not, particularly with the insurance aspect, and not
Yeah,
be concerned
yeah,
about.
absolutely. And we completely get that if you're a one-man band, you may not have the public liability cover for anybody other than yourself. Again, completely get it. That's more than fair enough, more than reasonable. You just let us know, you and the learner just let us know, and then so long as we've got that covered, then in the event that anything should happen, we've got our own policy we can draw down on. And nobody's ever broken a Ming vase, by the way. Just saying.
Touch wood.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
somebody will this afternoon just because I said it. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, it reminds me of a story not too far from here where someone did a house clearance, and they found it might have been a Ming vase or a particular vase that went for millions in auction. So whoever turned down the house clearance was very unlucky.
Oh oh, there's cash in the attic thing, you know, somebody, or that lovely moment of, you know, I paid the Antiques Roadshow, you know, I paid for this, it was £2.50 at a car boot sale, and you're telling me it's by Picasso and it's worth 250 million or whatever. Yeah. we all dream.
Awesome. Well, that's some really good insights there, and I think we'll move on to topic 2.